I'm no small. So.
Okay. Okay, guys, so thanks everybody for coming out. I'm just going to briefly say a few words about the event today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to speak more on what the event is about and introduce our speakers. So School of the Art Institute has recently formed a chapter of the Students for Democratic Society. We've been doing film screenings here for the past couple of weeks, and this is our first event with public speakers, and this is something that we'd like to have a tradition of in the future. We're also going to be planning, many more events in the semesters to come. And right now I'm a senior, so I'm going to be passing over this chapter to Megan and Matt and anybody else who wants to join. And it's really about building the political life at the school here and trying to incorporate it with the national, the city, and the regional SDS and the political life that surrounds all that. So after that, I'm just going to turn it over to Ashley, and she's going to tell you guys more about the event, the form of it, and our speakers. Thanks.
Hi, guys. Thanks for coming. So we're having a discussion today to sort of educate ourselves more about the political issues that are at stake in the May 1st march that is coming up next week. As most of you probably already know, Chicago is going to hold a large march throughout the city, coinciding with marches around the world in commemoration of International Workers' Day. And International Workers' Day is an event that commemorates the role of socialist movements and labor movements in being able to create progressive social and economic change. And that is something that these people to my left are in the forefront of doing today. It's also a goal that Students for Democratic Society is organized around. I guess I should introduce the panel. This is Tania Unzueta. She's part of the May 1st youth movement. Here we have Shaun Harkin, who's also part of Movimiento de Marzo, and Jorge Mujica, who also is one of the main organizers. I just wanted to say briefly, since 2006, May Day has been an event that has recognized explicitly in the political demands the relation between the immigrant rights movement, the civil rights movement, and the labor rights movement, because these are struggles that are very much interrelated. And part of the goal of Students for Democratic Society is recognizing the fact that we need to build democratic institutions and social frameworks that allow us to take the responsible role in creating the kinds of economic changes that we see necessary in society. And just as an example of that, with last week there was a series of raids in which over 400 people were detained and faced deportation. And a lot of the reaction among progressive students and among the mainstream media has been sort of ambivalent. And I think that a goal of the SDS and a goal of having people such as yourselves here to talk to us today is to educate ourselves so that we can recognize such a blatant act of economic exploitation and condemn it as such and stand up as part of a movement to condemn it as such. So hopefully this is just the beginning of the type of conversation and political discourse that will allow us to do that. So I'm going to pass it over to the speakers, and
okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. My name is Jorge Mujica. We tossed a coin here to see who was speaking on what. And I get to do the 101, Immigration 101. And let's do it the easy way. I guess I take it that most of you here are born in the United States. Anybody not born here in the United States? Wow, that's not 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, about 10%. That's more or less the proportion of non-U.S. born residents of the United States. 13% to be precise. The country with the highest percentage of foreign-born residents is Canada, 18%. It's not a whole lot. And it's worth it to mention it because if you hear the far right-wing opponents of immigration, you would believe that the United States is living an invasion. That's the word they use very often. We are being invaded. We have to defend our country. We have to defend the borders. We have to do so many things against the immigrants because they are invading the country. But beyond that, not the ones that were born abroad, but from the ones that were born here, which generation Americans are you? What ancestries do we have here? Whoever. What are your ancestors?
Polish Mexican.
Polish Mexicans. Okay. Who else?
German and Russian.
Okay.
German Irish.
German Irish. Oh my God. Okay. Who else? He's Irish. Who else?
Italian Irish.
Huh?
Italian and Irish.
Italian Irish. Who else?
Pakistan.
Pakistan.
I don't even know.
You don't even know. You may be the most American, maybe, but only maybe, because many people realize now, since 2006, that they do have foreign ancestry. It's an issue that wasn't talked about at home, because everybody spoke English and everybody's American, and you were born in Rogers Park. So what else can you be? American. And then, since 2006, more and more people found that, but I remember I used to speak Polish at home when I was little, and my grandma was living with us. So we are really Polish, Polish American and German American, and I don't know how many Americans, because everybody just add the American after their own ancestry. And why immigration? Why immigration? What's this whole deal about people moving from one place to another one? Let me find out very quickly, easy. How many of you were born outside the state of Illinois? Huge majority. Okay. From those that were born here in the state of Illinois, were you born in Chicago? Chicago proper? Chicago City? No. You were born in some suburb, in some other city outside Chicago, isn't it? Let me see. Is there anybody here that was born in Chicago? Nobody? I wonder. Well, people move. People move around. And people move always for the same reasons. People move for better education. People move for better jobs. Higher salaries within the same company, or the company just shut down in Peoria and moved to Rockford. And people move to Rockford. That's fine. Education, basically college and university. Why am I going to go to University of Illinois in Chicago if I can go to UCLA? And then people move, from the South Coast to the West Coast, from the North to the South. And within the same city, people move from neighborhood to neighborhood. Yeah, right, I was born in the south side of Chicago, but now I live in the north side, which is, pretty bad, because then you have to become a Cubs fan, and you won't go to the World Series in 5 generations. That's also a problem. But people move. That's a normal thing to do. Everybody moves around. Problem is, if you move beyond an international border, then everybody says, oh no, wait a second. You are alien. You can't move. We can move. Yeah, sure. We were born in Florida and we moved to Nebraska. I wonder why anybody would move to Nebraska, but people do it. But you were born abroad, so you can't move here. You have to ask for my permission to move beyond an international border. And then we get the so-called nativist point of view, that only natives of this country have rights, that only natives of this country can move around, that only natives of this country can do, the natural thing to do, moving, but nobody else. Nobody takes into account, for instance, and I have made the joke several times, that people from Indiana are coming to Chicago and they are taking our jobs. They are. They live there, they pay cheaper taxes, but they have the ability to come to Chicago every day and they work here. And they take our jobs away. That's one of the arguments everybody uses. Oh, immigrants are coming here and taking our jobs. And the other way around. George Bush started saying and repeating, over and over and over, well, no, immigration is okay because they come to take the jobs Americans won't take. And our answer to that is, well, nobody would take a job if it pays minimum wage. Yeah. But if you were paying $22 an hour for a gardener, I would bet there would be lines of American-born citizens very willing to take those jobs. On the other hand, if a physician was only earning minimum wage, I would bet to you that nobody would want to be a physician. Or a lawyer. Can you imagine a lawyer on minimum wage? We would have a lot of immigrants occupying those jobs because no American would want to take it. So yes, there's a whole scale of wages and jobs in society. And this society has been leaving behind the jobs, the worst paid jobs, the jobs with the worst health and safety conditions for somebody else. I'm a US-born citizen, so why would I have to risk my life or my limb working for a minimum wage in some factory? I mean, that's unthinkable. So let's move ahead, let's move upwards, and let's leave those jobs for someone else. The United States got a very big problem. Since the 1960s, the famous so-called sexual revolution, there were many things happening in the sexual revolution, but one thing was not happening: babies. Babies. The United States population started to decline in the 60s. Before the 60s, it was very common to have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. From the 60s to this day, couples have 1 kid. And 2 if, we forget to use that thing, and then now we have 2 kids. But most commonly, couples have 1 kid now. There's not enough US-born native workers to replace the workers that are leaving their jobs because they are, 67 or older. They have been working for 30, 35 years, and that's it. They retire. And who's going to be occupying those jobs? Well, as you go moving up on the scale, people from lower jobs or younger people try to go upwards, occupying those upper scale jobs. And the jobs in the very bottom are left behind, and who's going to, get there? Who's going to loan the malls? Whatever. English is not my native language, obviously. It's the waitress, people to do cleaning at the office. I always tell people also, I could never educate my own kids to do their own beds. Well, imagine if you had to go to a hotel and do your own bed. Of course not. Somebody's got to make your bed at the hotel. And if you use the service in the laundry, well, somebody's down there in the basement or sub-basement of the hotel doing the laundry. And it's not a native-born U.S. full-fledged citizen of the United States. Why? Because that person moved up and up and up. But somebody's got to do it. According to some economists, there are at least about 400,000 jobs, available jobs, each year, and each year jobs keep being created and created and created. At least 400,000 new jobs that no American in their right mind would occupy. They wouldn't go to work for minimum wage in the third sub-basement of the economy or the hotel. So those jobs are the ones immigrants take, because that job pays 10 times as much wages as in their own country. You just cross the border, south of the border, minimum wage today is $4 a day. So from $4 a day to $7 an hour, just do the math. People move, obviously. If you would move from Miami to Chicago, why not moving from Mexico to the United States? And why not move, for all that matters, from Costa Rica to Mexico? And why not move from Argentina to Colombia? And why not move from Italy to Germany? And why not move from Turkey to Sweden? It's a natural thing to do. If there are jobs available, they pay a whole lot more than what I'm earning, I move. The so-called immigration problem is not that natural movement of people. The so-called immigration problem is the permit thing. In order to move, you have to ask for a permit. I have to approve you moving. I have to give you a visa. Yeah, and then when you have a visa, you can move. Maybe you have heard the three main political candidates right now, pre-candidates, Obama, Hillary, and McCain, saying the same phrase. They should move to the back of the line and immigrate here legally, just the way our ancestors did. And the three of them say the same thing. Problem one is, when their ancestors moved, there was not a visa problem, just to start with. I mean, you just got here, and in the same port, in Ellis Island, your passport got stamped, and you just walk right in. And that's been like until a little before Second World War. Most people just disembarked, and that's it. And you got an automatic visa pretty much, except if you were Chinese. That was forbidden for the Chinese to move to the United States. Everybody else could just get here, and they would legally be approved and walk in. Second problem, there are visas available. Yes, there are visas available. The problem is that there are not enough visas available to move in. If you were to really go to the back of the line, it's a line that would take you 14 years on average, of waiting. That's for Mexicans, for instance, is about 14 years. For Koreans and Filipinos is between 17 and 24 years. Even visas for qualified workers, there's only 100,000 visas every year for 60,000 for highly qualified workers to move into the United States legally. Highly qualified. I'm not talking your gardener. I'm not talking the messenger. I'm talking the guy that he's really how do you call it? It's the nuclear physician. Yeah? It's only 60,000 available visas for that people to move in. And of course, there are more jobs than visas available. So if you get to the back of the line, you have to wait for 14 years, 10 years, 4 years, 24 years. And raise your hand if you know of any employer willing to wait 17 years for a worker. There's none. I mean, I might wait for you, how long, 15 days? 1 month, 1 month and that's it. If you're not working for me in 1 month, then you're not working for me. I'm going to get somebody else. In some incredibly particular cases, maybe I'm going to wait for you 6 months. But I'm not going to be waiting for you 10 years, 4 years, 17 years. You're nuts. It's absolutely impossible. So what people do is they just come here either by crossing the border or by, and that's the way 40 to 45% of undocumented immigrants got into this country, by airplane. I just get a tourist visa to visit the United States, over the holidays, Christmas. I'm going to do some shopping in Chicago, and I land in O'Hare, and, I just came to do shopping and go to Navy Pier. And 6 months later, this guy is still here, and his visa is expired, and he's still here. He already found a job, he's already working, and he becomes an undocumented worker, an undocumented immigrant in the United States. If he keeps waiting for his visa, well, he's going to be in her country of origin for the next who knows how many years. So people just come here, land here, legal passport, legal visa, the tourist visa. I call them the tourist class undocumented. And they just stay. They overstay their visas. That's it. We have a very personal problem. My wife's parents, my in-laws, my wife's mother is 98 now. 96, 98. She was 98 last November. Her husband, my father-in-law, is 91. And in order for them to come here legally, because of course my wife wants to have her parents in their last years of living, close to her. She's an only daughter, nobody else in the world to take care for these two people, and she wants her parents close to her. Obviously, that's natural, isn't it? Well, there's no way for her parents to come here and stay legally. My wife is not a citizen of the United States. She's been a legal resident for a number of years. In order to become a citizen of the United States, you have to make another line. It takes you anything from 6 months to a year and a half, depending on many things, from 6 months to a year and a half to go through the process of citizenship, get to do your test, approve your test, and then, 3-4 months later on, you are sworn in as a U.S. citizen. And then you can apply to bring your parents into the United States. I couldn't do it because they are not my parents. I could bring my wife, my son or daughter, or my own parents, but I can't bring my in-laws. That's in the law. So by the time my wife would be able to apply, and by the time a visa was given to her mother would be 112 or 106. Probably she wouldn't be anymore, period. That's it. So what do? We pay them a ticket, an airplane ticket. They travel with their tourist visa. They land in O'Hare. There's no wall in the border, between Chicago and O'Hare. Everybody can just walk right in, and that's it. They become undocumented 6 months later, and that's it. That's the natural thing to do. If we were living in Bolivia, we would do the same thing. We would bring them, close to us, where we feel that they are going to spend better, going to be taken care of better in their last years of living. It doesn't matter the country. You would do it anywhere where you were. If we were in Mexico, we would bring them to Mexico. We are in the United States, well, we would bring them to the United States. And that's the natural thing to do, but that's the waiting time to do it legally. So people just jump the border, people swim the river, people do whatever they need to do in order to get here. The problem is, again, not the movement of people. The problem is the permit to be here. When you become an undocumented immigrant in the United States, of course you came here to work, basically, reason number one, get a better job, get a better wage. You start working, but you lack one very simple thing, a number that is your Social Security number. The Social Security number used to issue Social Security numbers to anyone that requested one up until 1996. From 96 to this day, you have to prove that you are in this country legally in order to obtain a valid Social Security number. So people that can't be issued a legal Social Security number just create one. I write down my phone number as my Social Security number because I get a cell phone. Like the next day I'm here in the United States, I get a cell phone. Everybody's got a cell phone these days. So I just write down my cell phone number as my Social Security number, and I start working. And my employer starts discounting taxes and payments to Medicare, Social Security from my wages. So I start paying taxes, And the Social Security Administration says, but that number doesn't exist. Well, if it doesn't exist, then return my money. Because it's going somewhere. It's not like it doesn't exist. I created it. You didn't, but I did, and therefore it exists. And my money, part of my wages, are going to that number, whether you issued it or not. But my money is going to that number. In the last 10 years, from 1996, 1998 to this date, the number of fake or not Social Security numbers issued by the Social Security Administration has increased in an incredible amount. The money the Social Security receives from these fake numbers, from these cell phone numbers made into Social Security numbers, go to a special fund. It's called the Suspense Earning Funds of the Social Security Administration. This fund already has $585 billion. $585 billion. That's more than the whole admitted cost of the war in Iraq so far. And that's money that's obviously coming from people whose Social Security numbers are not issued by the administration, and that's part of the economic reality. That's part of the cost we pay.
So that's just money from numbers that have been perceptive. Right?
No.
Like
The suspense fund is made of anything that doesn't match the Social Security Administration data bank. The problem is that the Social Security Administration is one of the worst data banks in history. Admittedly, it's got 17 million mistakes. So most of the mistakes are U.S. citizens. It's complicated sometimes. I am dyslexic. I always write down the numbers exactly in the incorrect order. So I create a mismatch with the Social Security Administration. But then the Social Security Administration sends a notification, and I correct it. I have to write it 3 times to make sure it's right this time. As soon as it is corrected, the money goes into my account. Mistake corrected, that money gets withdrawn from the suspense fund, and it goes back to the right fund. So the money in the fund is after corrections were made, after dyslexics as me corrected their mistakes, etc. That's the money that is there, and it's suspended, exactly suspended. It's in limbo. $585 billion that are there. The Social Security Administration can't touch them because legally that money is to be assigned to pensions and other compensations, and is not to be used anywhere else. The Bush administration is very eager to tap into that money. You can believe they are. That can finance another war. So let's tap into it. And they tried. They started a very aggressive policy on this no-match situation, and they want everybody that's got a wrong or made-up Social Security number to get fired, and then they would appropriate that money because they would say, okay, these were illegal earnings, and therefore the state, has got the right to appropriate these illegal earnings. We are in the middle of that battle, and we are, going back and forth and trying a little bit to dismantle that policy. Hopefully, they are going to be out in a few months. Somebody new is going to be in the administration, and let's see what happens. But we are in the middle of that battle. So basically, this is the general, very incredibly general picture on immigration. Immigration is an incredibly hot topic. Everybody gets to say something about it these days. Everybody, people in the streets, people in the White House, everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. Everybody is forming an opinion on immigration. And unfortunately, obviously, we immigration advocates have the lesser hand in this game because we don't have access to massive communications and media, and we can't tell our version of immigration. The ones that are getting, their message across are Lou Dobbs on CNN, Laura Ingraham, and that's mass media. This is not mass media. That is mass media. And so people, lacking any other knowledge, start just repeating what Lou Dobbs said last night. And Lou Dobbs is saying things as outrageous as, for instance, just one example, it was widely commented. immigrants are responsible for the last 6,000 cases of leprosy in the United States. Well, in order to get 6,000 cases of leprosy in the United States, you have to go back to the 1930s. Because leprosy is something, pretty unknown here in the United States. But the guy just says it on the air, and 2 million people listen to that, and they start just repeating and repeating. Yeah, immigrants bring disease. Yeah, and immigrants bring disease. And that becomes a truth. Immigrants bring disease. That's it. And so on and on. So we are doing, the only thing we can do, we were in a radio program this morning and saying pretty much the same thing. What's our media? The only massive media we know and we have access to. Well, the streets of Chicago and the streets of many other cities in the United States. Back in 2006, we were put in a position, there was a piece of legislation, everybody called it the Sensenbrenner legislation, Sensenbrenner bill. Jim Sensenbrenner is a congressman from our neighbor here north, Wisconsin. And Sensenbrenner proposed that every undocumented immigrant should be made into a federal criminal, to elevate into a federal crime the fact of being here in the United States without papers. And not only immigrants, but also any people that helped undocumented immigrants. Meaning teachers, meaning the school bus driver, meaning nurses, meaning physicians, meaning anybody who would help. Your neighbor. I'm undocumented. Can you take my kids to school? Yeah, sure, I'll take them. Oh, you just became a federal criminal. That was Sensenbrenner's bill. So it put a title on us, criminals. We were terrorists since 2001, but we had not been criminals, yes. So he was putting a title on us. We are, besides of being suspects of terrorism, now we are criminals. And nobody liked it. And our way to respond to that, it was to march. And I think we were incredibly successful because when we marched, we showed our faces to everybody in the United States and say, hey, listen, I'm not a terrorist. I'm not a criminal. I am, as one of the best signs I have seen in my life, I'm not a terrorist. I'm the cook of your favorite restaurant. People showed themselves. We are human beings. We are fathers. We are mothers. We are sons. We are cousins. You may be your brother-in-law, your cousin or second cousin. We are your neighbor. We clean your beds. We clean your sheet. We do laundry. We do gardens. We do so many things. And we are lawyers, and we are physicians, and we are so many things, public accountants, and many, many, many things. We are just human beings. We were remembering the other day, the legal term for immigrants in this country is aliens. An alien is, something weird, something to be rejected. Is Chewbacca. That's an alien. And so we all are Chewbaccas and ETs, and therefore we are not equal. We are not equal. And since we are not equal, then everybody should get the right to treat us unequally. And that's the whole battle of immigration. We have to defeat the Ludovs, the Sensenbrenner like ideas that we are not equal, we are not human beings, we are always suspects of something, we always did something wrong, we bring disease, we bring bad to this country. And the way to defeat it, well, it's marching and, doing small talks and big talks sometimes whenever we have the chance. That's the big landscape of immigration. We could talk about this for hours, I swear to you, but let's cut it short. and let's go to other issues. Thank you.
I'll go next then. Jorge, I wanted to build off what Ashley started with and what Jorge started with as well, because I think the best way to start thinking about immigration, and this is not really knowing how familiar people are with the issues, but I like to look at it as a kind of a global issue. It's very much, it's a United States issue, but it's very much a global issue. And I think the first way to think about it is that we have a global economic order or a global economic trading system, or you can call it capitalism, or a name that's much worse than that. And I think that we have a division of labour inside capitalism, in the sense that there's economic restructuring that's happened all over the world in the last 30 years, and that labour gets sent to where it needs to go. So it's not just in the United States that we have an issue of immigration, it's really everywhere. If you think about China's tremendous economic growth, it's meant that millions of former peasants have come into the cities, and people have come from other countries as well to kind of feed China's economic development. It's the same thing in Europe. In Ireland, that never had any immigrants ever, apart from St. Patrick, who was brought there as a slave, apparently. Ireland has now becoming a completely different country. I never knew a single non-white person when I was growing up. The neighbourhoods were very segregated, but it was Catholic and Protestant. But now in Ireland, there's thousands of Polish workers there, a lot of Lithuanians, and people from Nigeria. So I think that the issue of the global division of labour creates these tensions and these problems. France is the same. I don't know if people are familiar with immigration into France. Right now in France, there's a really fantastic movement that's kind of taken off of undocumented workers that have organised sit-downs at many workplaces across France, and it actually has the support and the backing of the labour movement there. So I think what Ashley started out with is really important, because there's a connection between International Workers' Day and the issue of labour and immigration, because that's really what it comes down to. If people don't move to countries where there's no labour, so people basically go where they're wanted or where they're needed, and that's every country in the world. And there's a dual dynamic to this. People are going for work, but people are familiar with the term neoliberalism, deregulation and so on of markets and all that sort of stuff. And in the United States, we have NAFTA, which basically has destroyed millions of jobs in Mexico, and it's driven people north. So you've got the destruction of America's economic neighbour, but also the destruction of wages in the United States through the introduction of workers that are willing to work for a lot less. Now, again, this is not just a problem in the United States. I mean, Ireland has become basically an economic colony of the United States. That's what is talked about these days is what America and Ireland's special relationship really comes down to. Ireland has become a cheap labour source, a tax haven for US corporations. So it means that American companies have been very happy to go there and provide, cheap, low wage jobs. So it's the same issue in Ireland as for immigrants that are heading into Ireland as undocumented Irish in the United States. Today there's probably maybe 50 or 60,000 undocumented Irish in the US, which is a lot less than in the past. But they still face, for the most part, the same kinds of problems, apart from direct racism that other undocumented communities actually face. So I think if you think about it in that context, it makes it feel less of just an American problem and just Mexicans coming to the United States to kind of invade and to ruin the country. So I think that's the first place to kind of start with in terms of thinking about the issue. And then obviously the problem for us is that Lou Dobbs and others don't necessarily, or we don't have access to the mainstream media to be able to put the problem in this context, in the sense it's look, if the American economy and NAFTA and so on destroys jobs in Mexico, where are people going to go for work? So there's kind of a problem in terms of how the story is told in the United States of how people arrived here. And I think people would be much more sympathetic if they actually understood that the relationship between economies and what corporate America is actually doing. So I think that broader context is really, really key. The second thing is, I think that corporate America, why did we start having a problem in 2006? Because there wasn't really a problem. Because some people say, well, we have these laws that need to be respected in the United States, and all these people have broken them, so they need to be punished. But, for years and years and years and years, people have been coming here, millions of people. You can't have 12 or 13 million people in your country without noticing it. So I think that corporate America had a great deal, in the sense that you have millions of workers coming here without rights, without, that you can intimidate. If they try to unionize, you can threaten them with deportation. And you have a cheap labour force, and you don't have to acknowledge them. They can't vote and so on and so forth. So this was a brilliant deal, I think, for corporate America. And that's why they had laws on the books, but nobody really wanted to back them up and enforce them. So what happened? What changed? I think that after 9/11, you have basically the building of the national security state, and now everybody has to have an ID card, and we have to know who's in the country because they might be terrorists. So I think that corporate America, they don't really like this plan, but they're forced to kind of go along with it, because there's even resistance within corporate America to the idea that we need to know who all your workers are, because they're quite worried that where is the labour going to go that we rely on to basically pick strawberries in the fields or tomatoes and so on and so forth, all the work that immigrants do in this country. So I think that tension set the stage really for what Sensenbrenner did back in 2005, which was to basically, this was the right wing of the Republican Party, and in some ways the right wing of the Democratic Party, unfortunately, that came up with this new bill that would basically deport all the undocumented. And I think that was a complete and utter disaster, even for corporate America. The moderate wing of the Republican Party and the moderate wing of the Democrats thought this was a really, really bad idea. But in the context of kind of like all the hysteria and racism and so on after 9/11, they were able to push this through. And then, I think what we've seen in response to that was absolutely amazing. And I think it's going to be a historic, the events of like 2006 and the mobilisations. I think we're going to look back on these and say, this was one of the movements that helped to transform American society, not just for immigrants, but for everybody that lives here, in the same way that we think about the civil rights movement of African Americans back in the 50s through into the 60s. In Chicago, if people are not familiar, there was an initial march here on March 10 in Chicago that had something like, 400,000 people. And this started, and that's why March 10 is called the March 10 movement, because it dates back to that date. There was a number of calendar coalitions that were built all around the country. It was March 25th. The names were basically organised around the first marches that people built. So you had this amazing kind of uprising, in a sense, of the undocumented to say, we are here, we feel confident enough to say that we belong here, and we might be illegal, but all the work that we've done here in this country is perfectly legal, because massive amounts of profits have been made off our labour. So we deserve the right to be here and to stay here and to become full citizens. So initially you had, a wave of demonstrations that was kind of people reacting to a crisis. The idea of, I don't know what it would have taken to remove all the undocumented from the United States. It would have taken a lot of buses, a lot of planes and helicopters. It's not just going back to, not just going south, but I think there's 1 million African immigrants in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of them are undocumented. You think about the, people here from the Philippines and so on. So this would have been a massive and major undertaking that would have totally disrupted and dislocated American society and American business. So we went from that to basically then moving on to people, because of the numbers that demonstrated in those first months of March and into April, people began to feel a sense of confidence because they realised they had support. America is a country of immigrants, and I think people can kind of go both ways, in the sense that when they hear Lou Dobbs talking about racism and leprosy, they can have some anti-immigrant feelings. But at the same time, everybody here has people in their family or friends that are from other countries. So there's a sympathy, I think, as well for the undocumented. And I think we began to see that there was support for that. The first May Day march here in 2006, I don't know is there anybody here that participated? Okay, that's brilliant. I thought it was an amazing rally. It was probably the best rally I was ever on. It was 750,000. And being an activist in the United States and knowing that International May Day around the world is celebrated and demonstrated, but you come to the United States and people don't even know what it is, and it was founded here by workers in Chicago, to actually be able to participate in a demonstration that was so huge. It was brilliant, and it was, there was Irish undocumented workers there, African undocumented workers, and legal, people from all over Latin America. There was workers there from the Middle East, Asia. So it was like a brilliant demonstration in one sense of solidarity. And it was overwhelmingly working class as well. I mean, it wasn't just workers that were demonstrating, because these are laws that are not just targeting immigrant workers, this is just the immigrant community in general. So that was amazing. The second thing that was really amazing about the demonstration is that it brought back a tradition which hasn't been utilised enough in America in a long, long time, which was to withhold your labour. And that was called economic boycott, where millions of people says we're not working today. It was a day without immigrants. And I think this was part of the brilliant part of May Day, which is that workers in the past in the United States, immigrants, undocumented and native born, if they've wanted anything or tried to struggle for anything, withholding your labour is usually a pretty effective way to actually get it, because the country can't really function on that basis. So I think that definitely sent a message to corporate America and anybody that cared that you can't really function without us. So I think that was an amazing event. And there's a sense that where did this movement come out of? It seems, is it just spontaneous? Is it just because people were kind of angry on May Day 2006, or did it come from somewhere? And I think the way to look at it again is this was building in a sense that, in the 1990s, if people are familiar, there was growing unionisation drives by undocumented workers. Immigrant workers in the United States have a higher level of unionisation, probably because of their conditions. Unions have had an orientation on them because people are more sympathetic from other countries to join in unions. There was a AFL-CIO kind of labour-sponsored freedom ride back in 2003, which was again modelled on the African American struggle, and it culminated. I mean, it was a brilliant event that went across the country, stopping in all sorts of communities, basically to say we demand amnesty, and that's what the demonstration was for. So it was a massive event because Labour, in terms of the American labour movement, acknowledged the role of immigrants as its future, and also called for amnesty, which was a change, because the American labour movement, in the sense of the AFL-CIO, had always had an either anti-immigrant position, where they seen it as a threat to immigrant workers, or a kind of mixed approach to it, and they came out in support of amnesty. And I think that this represented a big step forward in terms of consciousness around the issue from a labour perspective. So I think it was the combination of that kind of movement that was growing up very, very quietly and unnoticed by the mainstream press that was able to kind of explode when there was a big crisis that faced it back in 2005 and 2006. So the movement didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, many of these people that organised the demonstrations have been organising for 30 years or 10 years or 5 years and were quite experienced. And that's why I think much of the organising was able to happen very, very quickly. Obviously, we don't have a solution yet to the problem. I mean, we have a basic solution. We were kind of talking about, well, what is our policy solution to this issue? And it's kind of one word, which is amnesty. If George Bush wants a kind of document, that's all it needs to say on it. Amnesty, full legalisation for all with full civil rights, the right to join a union, and so on. I don't know what it's going to take to actually win that. It seems right now we're quite distant from it in terms of a goal. But there is a struggle that we're in the midst of. And I think where we are today, I mean, it's May 1st. There was some arguments this year not to march. It's kind of like, why march? We've marched the last couple of years, and what has it produced? Some people even said, well, it's an election year, and this is just going to give the right wing an opportunity to bash the Democrats and make it, I don't know who would be the winner, Tom Tancredo or John McCain. There's a number of it's a fine discussion to have, and maybe we can talk about what's the relevance of marching. Does it really get us anywhere? Does it get us what we need? Is it the right thing to do in an election year? And a number of us in Chicago who'd been part of organising the marches felt really, really strongly that given the way the election debate was actually happening, that it was so anti-immigrant that the only way that we were going to be able to have any impact this year was by having a mobilisation. Because the only way the press will cover immigrants in a positive way is if they march in large numbers and put out their demands, which is, legalisation is the main demand. And then the other key reason, I think, for marching this year is because, the immigration discussion might have died down a bit in the media or, have become more right-wing, but the war against the undocumented is actually intensified. It's got far worse, as people are probably familiar. The Pew Centre did a study of Latino attitudes, and across the board, people felt they're living in much more fear of a raid, of a deportation, of a detention, and that's what it's like right now in immigrant communities. So there is a real sense of fear, along with a sense of confidence that we've marched, we've demonstrated our power, we know how powerful we are, we know we can win this movement. And just to go through some statistics about where we are in terms of like what that war looks like. Workplace raids, and last week we had a big one, Pilgrim's Pride, 400 workers, and a number of those were workplaces where there's unions, like the UFCW and the steel workers. Last year there was a massive raid at a company called Swift across the country where there was over 1,000 workers picked up, and this was the first big demonstration raid by the Bush administration, basically to terrify people. I mean, 1,000 is not that many, but when it's national news and you see pictures of people getting picked up at their workplace in chains, it does send a chill through immigrant communities and anybody that wants to fight on their side. And clearly, this was about targeting unions as well, because the question of immigrant rights and the rights of labour and unions are very, very tied up together. So 2004, there was something like 684 workers arrested through workplace raids. 2007, it was over 4,000. I mean, that's a huge increase in terms of like, you're just going to work. You're not really stealing stuff, and you're getting arrested in your workplace. In terms of ICE's operations, Immigration Customs Enforcement, it's an arm of DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. They've now deported a record number of people in 2007. It was something like 200,000, which is a massive increase again. And the way that they're doing it is they're trying to target what they call criminals. But this is really, back in 1996, the Clinton administration expanded what was considered a felony. It increased it by 57 more categories. So you can be kind of picked up now for anything, and that can be considered a felony. For example, if you smash a Starbucks window, that's a felony, and that can get you deported or put into one of these categories. So you can really be lifted now and deported for really, any reason. Detentions in the United States have increased massively as well. Something like 30,000 undocumented are held in detention cells across the country, and there's a big race to build more. I don't know if all the big corporations, Boeing and Raytheon, are all trying to get in on the loot around that. My younger brother was working in New York. He got picked up, spent 3 months in a detention centre in Pennsylvania, out in the middle of nowhere, and that he was basically saying, I'm ready to leave and pay my own flight. But the madness of this, the way that they deal with immigrants, is that they force you to stay even when you're saying, I'm ready to leave, which means that it's good business. It means they can build prisons, and they can, private prisons can basically charge for whatever the costs are to house someone for 3 months against their will. So you get this mad system where there's, this is obviously, it's not, the mainstream press is not covering this on a day-to-day basis. So there's an intensification of the war, and that's also on the border. There's been more deaths at the border, more bodies being found at the border, and there's an obvious reason. People have probably heard about the militarization of the border. There's all sorts of fences being built and new security operations and more border patrol, which means it's harder and harder to get across the border, which means more people are dying in the desert. So across the board, we're really seeing an intensification on the war on the undocumented, and people are more in fear. So we basically felt, for all these reasons, it's again important to march on May Day. And what we were able to do is, we weren't alone in Chicago in thinking that. There was, activists in Indiana, and we were able to organise a conference there a couple of months ago that 50 people attended. And out of that, we then built a conference here in Chicago on March 8th and 9th, and we had around 200 people come to it, which even for us was a big surprise because we couldn't get any media coverage. And we felt, right, now we have a basis to really build this march. And I think organisation and the building for the march has really taken off since then. And now everybody wants to participate. Some people who were not even sure we want to participate, like Mayor Daley, who has been invited by some people who are involved with us in the march to be a keynote speaker. And just on the issue of Daley, one of the reasons why, I mean, there's many reasons to say, well, does he really represent our vision for what May Day is about in the immigrant rights struggle? And I think there's one Daley has spent a lot of his time trying to bust unions in Chicago. I mean, he was against the big box ordinance. He's been a privatizer. He's very corrupt. We just reached out to the African American community and had an event at Rainbow Push with Jesse Jackson, where Jesse Jackson came out and said, I support legalization for the undocumented, and we're going to march together in May Day. And as we know, Daley is very much connected with police brutality and Burge. So, and even beyond that, I mean, Chicago is supposed to be an immigrant sanctuary, but life in Chicago is not what it should be for the undocumented here. The ICE has been able to operate in Chicago in places like Little Village without, and that can only happen with the support of the city administration. So in addition to kind of like questioning his invitation, we have some demands as well for Daley. One is, assembly members in California just put out a call for an end to the raids in California, and I think that this is a great proposal. Why can't we do that here in Chicago? This is one of the things we're going to be talking about in May Day. We want the City Council to actually pass a resolution calling for an end to the national raids and put pressure on the Bush administration to make that a reality. The second thing is in San Francisco, the mayor of San Francisco, Newsom, they had Sanctuary City on their books since 1989, which can mean something or can mean absolutely nothing in terms of how police interact with the undocumented or how public services can be accessed. But what they did in San Francisco is that they basically said, we're going to give some meat to this proposal, and they went on a citywide campaign to basically tell the undocumented that you're safe in San Francisco. You can go and get health care, you can go to school, you can get public services. This is another demand that we want to put on the mayor. If he is pro-immigrant and he's pro-undocumented, why can't we do these kinds of things, in Chicago? So I'll say a couple of more things and I'll wrap up and let Tania. But I wanted to give one example of where I think that the big marches and the movement kind of show the future of the rebuilding of the labour movement in the United States, and that kind of combines the right to be here along with the right to fight for a much better life. And I don't know if people are familiar with the story about the Cygnus strikers that happened in the south side of Chicago last summer. We were all involved in it, and it's an amazing story. It was a workplace that makes basically soap for national companies like Target. It's generic. They make generic soap and they sell it off. There was something like 118 workers there. 8 of them were permanent workers. Only 8. All the rest were temporary. Almost every worker there was Mexican. I think the vast majority of workers there were undocumented. This was a tremendously profitable company. And there's a long story and there's a shorter story. Basically, management said that you guys don't have proper paperwork because the Bush administration's been pushing this issue of no-match letters, which is connected to what Jorge was talking about. A no-match letter is something that an individual or a company receives to let you know that your Social Security number doesn't match what the Social Security Administration has on record. So it can get you terminated if you can't fix it. So this is a device for basically smashing union drives and also to intimidate workers who go and ask for a wage. As it happened, the workers at Cygnus had went and asked for a wage increase of a couple of dollars, and management responded by saying, guess what, guys? You guys don't have proper paperwork, so we're going to have to fire you if you can't fix this. And it was meant to chill the workplace and get everybody back to work. But what they did is, instead of accepting that, they went on strike, and they basically shut down the company for 2 weeks and forced the company to back down. And we got a tremendous amount of media coverage. I mean, it was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The amazing thing about the story is that the workers had no union, and none of them had union experience. They'd never been on strike before. So it's kind of like, I think that this is if you connect up May Day, the struggle for legalization, and the future for workers' rights in the United States, we're going to see many, many battles like this one, where it's people who don't necessarily have a union, aren't documented, but say, we've had enough of this, and we're going to actually try and take a stand. And I find if you add like Well, I find that a tremendously inspiring struggle. And where did the confidence come from to actually do this? And I think it goes back again to like the big mobilisation on May Day 2006, where people withheld their labour. And I think the workers at that plant had actually negotiated the day off with their employer. It's not really a negotiation. It's kind of saying, well, we're going out. We're going to this demonstration anyway, so you can either fire us all and then you have to have a replacement workforce, or you can give us the day off and everybody's happy. And that's what they did. And I think it was that confidence from participating in such a massive mobilisation that then gave them the confidence to go back into their own workplace and do this strike with little support. They did get support from immigrant rights activists. So I think that's what are the connections between those struggles, May Day and rebuilding the labour movement? I think that's a key one, and that's kind of the future of the labour movement. I think for marching on May Day, it's really, really hard to tell how big it's going to be. In some ways, the size of the march isn't the key thing. It's the process of building a movement that can continue the struggle for legalisation, even in a period when it's much harder to do that. And building up the kind of networks and so on that can make that continue. I think we're pressing our demand now. We're not going to win legalisation. We know that before November. But what happens after November, who knows? Who knows who the administration is going to be? If the Democrats sweep, and it's a very different picture, I think people's confidence will be much higher to say, we backed you, and now it's time to deliver on the promises that you've been making during the elections. And I think the kind of movement that we start building today is going to help us determine what that looks like, after November. And I think, again, we've simple demands. No one is illegal. We want an end to the raids and the deportations. We want an end to the militarisation of the border. And we want a complete amnesty where people have the right to build unions and have civil rights like others American citizens are supposed to have. I'll finish there.
Okay, so mine I think will be a bit more brief and a bit more focused on sort of micro issues rather than looking at the macro level in terms of immigration. Well, first of all, again, my name is Tania Unzueta, and my day job is I'm the director of youth training over at a community radio station called Radio Arte. And some of my experience around immigration comes from my own experience being an immigrant, from organizing, but as well from a lot of the stories that I hear from the youth that I work with, a lot of whom are undocumented. And so I wanted to talk just first about raids and deportations. Obviously, that's one of the main demands of the immigrant rights movement, to end the raids and deportations. And this is very specific relationship to youth and immigrant youth in particular. I mean, obviously, when there's a raid, there's issues with family separation, and even though there's the ICE has a hotline for people to call when people get detained, and it doesn't work. They don't have immediate information. People get lost all the time, and so there's a huge issue with just families not being able to take care of their children in case that there's a raid, right? Or not really having a plan. And then there's been a lot of studies, in particular by the Southern Poverty Law Center, that talk about how raids and deportations affect the mental health of young immigrants or young citizens, young people in general. And it has a very detrimental effect in terms of anxiety around family separation, but also it has a lot of identity stuff, who are you? Am I an immigrant? Am I American? And then constantly hearing these attacks on immigrants, it has very negative effects on youth in particular. Obviously, another huge issue for immigrant youth is education, or lack of access to education. As you may or may not know, undocumented students don't have access to federal scholarships because it comes from federal money and you have to be a citizen. And a lot of even private scholarships, even those are some of the ones that undocumented students can get. And only in a few states, I want to say it's 5 or 6, including Illinois, can undocumented students get in-state tuition or pay in-state tuition. And this is as of 2002, maybe, around that time, which means that outside of those 5 states, students who are undocumented have to pay out-of-state tuition, which usually means international student tuition, which can be as much as 3 times or 4 times the tuition that a resident of the state would pay. And so this is something that I'm faced with every day at work. You know, like I have students who are 17, 16 years old who are finishing high school and who come up to me and tell me, you know, my school counselor told me that I could apply for this scholarship, but, you know, I'm not a citizen. So what do I tell my counselor? How do I talk to my counselor about what kind of opportunities I can get in order to continue my education without necessarily outing myself as an undocumented immigrant? Not only because that has social consequences, but because it may very much have legal consequences, because you never really know what the attitude of the person that you're talking to is. In terms of focusing a little bit on youth, the issue of traveling is very important. Again, I've heard so many stories, and from personal experience, being a young person living in the United States and not being able to travel is very hard. If you're in school and your friends are going to Canada, to the Niagara Falls, or like studying, you know, French in France for a semester, or even going to border states, it's a huge frustration for undocumented students. You know, they often come up to me and tell me, you know, like, I'm number 1 in my French class, and I could have gotten a scholarship to go study abroad, but guess what? If I go, I probably wouldn't be able to return. And so it's a huge risk, and not risk, I mean, it just can't happen. And now that enforcement actions have gotten even harsher, I think, within the United States, where we have companies like Amtrak and like Greyhound allowing immigration officials to go into their buses and into the trains and ask people for their documents, for their immigration documents. And according to testimony of people who've been in trains and buses, you know, it's how do you tell if someone may possibly be an undocumented student or undocumented immigrant? You ask mostly the brown people. And it's happened to some of my coworkers, actually, who, you know, again, on a bus, on a Greyhound. And of course, what Greyhound says is, well, we're just trying to follow the law. And if you're an undocumented immigrant, you shouldn't be in here to begin with. Yeah, walk. And so that becomes an issue again. You know, and I think that the example that Jorge was giving at the beginning of, you know, how many of you guys have been able to travel within the United States. Now imagine having a constant fear of possibly being detained and possibly getting deported constantly, basically. Another topic, the issue of taxes and the issues of jobs. As Jorge and Shaun were mentioning, you know, immigrants pay taxes constantly, and something happened to me recently where one of my students, who's 16 years old, who's thinking about getting a job, who's undocumented, and, you know, she asks me, like, so what do I need to do to be able to work? And, you know, I really can't tell her anything, you know, go get a fake social security number in 26th Street, but I can't really do that as a mentor at Radio Arte, maybe off time hours. And so, you know, like, I can talk to her about getting an ITIN number, the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, which is issued by the Internal Revenue Service for those people who don't have a social security number, precisely so that they can pay taxes, even though they can't necessarily get them back. And there's a whole thing about when you submit your tax returns, if you use an ITIN number, that automatically disqualifies you for a lot of tax benefits that you could get in return, including this latest economic stimulus package. So people who apply with an ITIN number can't get those $600 that we're all supposed to spend back into the economy. And so she tells me, you know, what can I do in order to get a job? And the only thing I can tell her is, like, well, honestly, like, this is what you would need to get a job. You would need an ID, and you would need your social security card. And I can tell you how to get an ITIN number so that you can report your taxes. And so she looks at me and you know, very, like, I think this is one of the first times that she hears this, but she's like, oh, so I can pay my taxes but I can't like work legally. How does that really work? And I think that, you know, this is an issue for workers in general, but I think when you're a youth and you're just starting to even figure out that you are undocumented, because maybe you had never really thought about it before until you try to get a job, or when, you know, people ask you like, so where you born? Oh, really? And people at schools have gotten constantly asked, like, another story from one of my students, they were in choir class and they're going to China, and there's a couple of Latino kids, and of course, like, one of the teachers like goes up to them and asks them, so can you travel to China? You know, the Latino students, she asks them, and so like stigmatization at school, you know, what does that do to your identity? What does that do to your mental health? Let's see, in terms of, health. Low-income children with immigrant parents face higher rates of food and insecurity and other hardships than children with native-born parents. This is according to, well, I'll look it up. A study in October 2005. But I mean, and if you think about it, you know, a lot of immigrant parents who are undocumented either don't know that their children qualify for food stamps or for any kind of aid if their children are citizens, and sometimes they're just too proud of getting them. You know, a lot of immigrants come here with the idea that they're going to be able to provide for their families, and then they don't need the help of the federal government, and that, you know, this is their job basically. And a third reason would be that a lot of people think that their status may be affected, right? So whether they're undocumented, they may think that in the future someone may look at if they got food stamps or not, and then that may have something to do with their application to become a citizen or their amnesty application, if that ever happens. Of course, insurance at work. Undocumented immigrants, many of them can't qualify for insurance at work, which means that many times their families don't have health insurance. And this in particular, it's important to women in particular, I'm thinking, because in terms of sex ed education, access to pregnancy and what is it called? Prenatal care. Yes, that is particularly important. But also, well, and relating to women, the Violence Against Women Act. I don't know how many people have heard of that, VAWA. And basically what VAWA says is that immigrants, undocumented immigrants, women who are undocumented immigrants who are getting their legalization through their partner, through their male partner, because it doesn't apply to gay people, they don't have to stay married in order to get legalized, right? And so they can continue their legalization if there's domestic violence at home. However, that also goes into this whole power dynamic, correct? Because if the husband, you know, destroys the women's immigration documents, or you know, decides to tell her that she's going to get deported, or that he's going to call immigration, and so there's a particular effect on women around domestic violence, and of course, how much do you trust the police if there's an attack, and do you know whether the police are going to deport you or not? In particular, speaking about another community, the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community, there's very specific things that affect immigrants who are part of this group. In particular, the issue of HIV status, and I mean, obviously not all gay people have HIV, but it's a particular issue within the gay community. But people who are in general HIV positive do not qualify to become legal residents, and have not been included in any of the legalization proposals, including like the Strive Act and the Save Act and all the Gutierrez, I don't remember. And so that is a problem, as well as the issue of sort of these combined kinds of oppression, right? I work with a lot of youth who are both undocumented immigrants and queer. So that means that not only do they not have the support of the institution, for example, their schools, they a lot of times don't have the support of their families because of their sexuality, and are often, you know, at risk of getting kicked out from their homes. And what does that say about the kinds of services that they would be able to get as undocumented immigrants? So anyway, I think that one thing that is very particular about the marches this year is that there's a lot of different groups that are seeing all these different ways that immigration laws affect people, how women are affected, how gay people are affected, how youth are affected, how people who are against the war are affected, and how the war relates, because we talked about building the border, but also the same people who are getting paid to build the border are the same people who are getting paid to, send and sell arms to the war in Iraq. And so I think that something that is kind of important about the march, and not that it hasn't happened in other times, but that there's a lot of public support from all these various and diverse groups. And I think that it's, if we're talking about in terms of like, why do we march or why continue to march, I think it has to also do with building coalitions and with also like realizing how our movements are connected. And I think that both the March 10th movement and the other coalitions that have come together to organize around May 1st have learned a lot through this process, not only about organizing and political strategy, but also about other communities. I can tell you I interviewed Jorge, I think about 2 years ago, about the gay community, and then his answers weren't that good.
To say the least.
To say the least. But I think that so I think that we're all working on a lot of things, and the effects that I think we still haven't seen the effects of the marches, nor will we see them anytime soon. I think that the like strongest effects that these mobilizations will have will be kind of in the generations of the future and in how we organize, what we learned about organizing, what we learned about each other, what we learned about coalition building. And so I think, so lately I've also been working with mostly the youth and the student group of the March 10th Coalition. And we have focused on 4 things, I think: education, outreach, resources, and education about know your rights. And I think that in particular, because one of the things that we've identified is that people are against immigration a lot of times when they don't know a lot of the facts, or when they've seen all these negative images of people in the media. And we figured that one of the ways of talking about these issues would be to educate people and to talk about the real stories and the real, the stories of the people and the kind of more good and intelligent analyses of the situation. And so that's pretty much it.
So I think that there's going to be 2 more parts to the meeting today. The first part we'll have about half an hour or so to do question and answer with the audience and our panelists today, who will be able to field any of your questions. The second part is going to be to talk amongst ourselves about what kind of strategies and tactics we might use as students in institutions to mobilize our student bodies to come out on May 1st, to build organization within the student bodies so that we can turn out to other events and continue to grow, and also to raise consciousness amongst our peers about the issues that we've learned about today. I don't know about you guys, but I find that a lot of people don't know enough, and that is part of the reason why they don't turn out. It's part of the reason why they don't take up an activist stance in relation to these issues. So as students, I think that we can play a role in raising consciousness, in organizing. And so the third part of the meeting, after the panelists field some questions, will be to talk about that kind of work. So I encourage everybody to stick around for that, because that's really going to be what we carry out of this room, is the decisions and the tactics and the strategies that we take on today to go forward for May 1st and for the duration of the struggles. So I'd like to, I'll moderate the question and answer as people raise their hands. Abby.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. I'm not sure if this is a direct question, but my understanding is that when people are deported or fired or harassed, into submission at their jobs or for whatever course of action, my understanding is that these jobs don't really disappear. It's just that other people move in to take them. So I'm a little confused about what the goals are of the anti-immigration movement. It seems like it's this duplicitous action to, on one hand, appease some jingoistic outcry while being able to continue on with business as usual at the expense of people whose lives are just ruined. I mean, so I'm just trying to understand, I just don't understand, why this is happening. Do you know what I mean? What is the goal of the anti-immigration movement? What are they actually trying to achieve?
I have a kind of answer. Fear. When you beat somebody into submission, you are more likely and more free to exploit that person. In the old Roman Empire, it was legally considered that a slave only had half a soul. Therefore, you can sell it, buy it, beat it, kill it, or do whatever you want because they only have half a human soul. That's happening with the immigrant community. It's not that they really want to get rid of us. It's that they want to beat us into submission, and therefore you won't protest, you won't ask for a raise, and if you beat me enough, hard enough, I'm going to take less than minimum wage. I'm not going to collect my overtime. I'm going to work on Saturdays and Sundays, and I don't know anything else. I won't complain if you give me cancerogen, how do you say that in English? It's chemical substances cause cancer, and I don't have a mask. Who cares? Because I'm an immigrant, and they beat me hard enough. It says something here. Oh yeah, back in 1985 or something like that, Ronald Reagan conducted 84. Ronald Reagan conducted a huge, big operation on raids and deportation, and he called it Operation Wetback. And all the jobs, the theory of Operation Wetback was to liberate jobs from immigrants to give it to U.S. citizens. 1 year later, and these were thousands of people detained, many of them deported, some of them not, but detained, harassed, whatever. And 1 year later, the GAO, the General Office of Accountability,
Government Accountability Office.
Government Accountability Office came out with a study. The consequence of the raids was that they displayed undocumented immigrants and were replaced by undocumented immigrants, of course. But that was it. I mean, I'm telling you, who U.S. citizen is going to go get a job for minimum wage, or day laborers? Like Shaun was saying in this experience at Cygnus, you go make a line at 4:30 in the morning, in the middle of winter, 10 degrees below, to see if you get a job. Not even to get a job, just to see if you can get a job for the day. By 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't get it because there were not enough available jobs. Then you go stand on a corner, by the Home Depot, to see if somebody needs, a painter for the day, a carpenter, an electrician. That's the way the economy works. Isn't the real consequence is not, really to get rid of undocumented immigrants. It's just to beat them enough to make them cheaper and more fearful.
I'm sorry. Did you also
Just a quick addition to that. I think the question of why is very important, but I don't know that a lot of them know themselves why they're doing this. I think some of them. And I think that a lot of it does have to do with racism. I think that we've all kind of seen. I've been recently on this one website, ALIPAC, the Americans for Legal Immigration, partly because the minutes from the youth group were found on it. And, a lot of the comments are, I can't believe that these people feel like they deserve these rights, the rightfulness of, the guts that they have to, demand things, such as, they're undocumented, blah, blah, blah. And I think that, there's also a lot of racism within it, because the idea of who is an American, right, and of who can have access to the resources in the United States, obviously not foreigners, right, and they identify people who are immigrants and people who are in support of the immigrant rights movement as foreigners, therefore, people who shouldn't have access to the wealth that we've built here in the United States. And I wanted to say that there's a website called Minutemen Uncensored, and it kind of collects videos and sounds and emails of the Minutemen Project that kind of like reflect some of the not so public points of views that they have, in particular around race and immigration.
There's just an additional thing to add about the raids, because they are schizophrenic, because the Bush administration has never supported the deportation of all the undocumented. I mean, the Bush administration is pro-business in the sense that they know that businesses rely on undocumented workers, so they want a constant supply and they want the ones that are here to stay. So what the Bush administration is doing, what Jorge said, it's about intimidation and trying to push people back into the margins. 2, it's anti-union. A lot of these workplace raids are targeted in shops or workplaces where there are unions in existence or where there's organising campaigns happening. And it's vicious. It's that clear cut. That's why they do these things, to stop unionisation from going up. And then there's an additional thing, which is the Bush administration tried to send a message to the business community that if you don't support our version of comprehensive immigration reform and the guest worker plan, we will disrupt your business. We will put you out of business. So it was directed at the undocumented and at unions, but also at corporate America, to get everybody in line behind the Bush and behind comprehensive immigration reform, which was basically the same thing that the Democratic Party was supporting, which included a massive guest worker program, which is in some ways you're legal, but you're still a second-class citizen. That was the idea behind that. So that's why it's schizophrenic. And then the final thing is there's a much narrower part, which is Bush is probably the most unpopular president in American history. His own party is trying to stay away from him. So one of the things about doing the raids is that the right wing of the party, this is kind of a bone to the right wing of the party to pacify and to please them. It's like, you want to deport and crack down on the undocumented, so we're doing it. And the idea is this is going to help whatever candidate becomes McCain, obviously. This will help his election chances.
Yeah, you mentioned several times, and I noticed on there's like a promotional YouTube video about the solidarity between the unions and the immigrant community. And I was just wondering, how strong is that bond? And assuming that there still needs to be progress on that front, like what are you doing to tackle it, like strengthening the bond between the union movement and the immigrant community?
Let me go first. Just like in the global economy, you can take one or the other attitude. You become a protectionist and you say, no importations, no exportations, we're going to survive on our own and let's reject globalization. Or you say, okay, let's embrace it, let's try to, put some conditions to it, let's try to regulate it and make the best of it. You can do the same thing if you're a labor union regarding the undocumented workers. You can reject them outright, and say nothing to do. These are people that are stealing our jobs, and that's it. Deport them all. We only want our own U.S. citizen workers in our union. Or you can embrace them, be realistic, and say, yeah, let's go and unionize them, and let's make them part of our labor force and strength, and we can learn from them, we can teach them other things, and we can build a more powerful labor union here. Who rejects them outright? Here in Chicago, particularly, the so-called trades labor unions, the same ones that reject anyone else that is not white, the ones that have been rejecting, traditionally and historically the African American community. The building trades. The building trades, it's not a matter of being an immigrant or not. It's a matter of a very racist point of view. That's it. You have to pay $3,500 to get into one of the building trades labor unions. They are all white. Jesse Jackson and a number of people have, set up picket lines at the construction sites because they're Not a single African American person working in some construction sites. And these are, paid by public funds, and there should be equal employment opportunities and minority hiring and blah, blah, blah. Well, unions don't allow it. So you can go either way. We have a lot of success with labor unions like the Service Employees International Union, because they organize the janitors of all of the building offices, with Unite Here, the United Needle Trades and whatever textile, hotel and restaurant employee workers. These labor unions that have to face reality and say, okay, it's not who do I get in my labor union, is who's doing the jobs I organize around.
Lori?
I wanted to focus more specifically on May 1st. What is being done right now in terms of you guys, in terms of turnout, or what's going to happen that day, and also the question I believe Shaun brought up was how we're going to judge this as a potential successful event, like is it purposeful or not, and then the third part of that would be like, so what's next? What if there's a good turnout, and what if we got first spread of the Chicago Tribune? What comes after that?
You want to do it?
Well, I can say something about it. We think that the level of mobilisation right now is fantastic. We're surprised by how much it's taken off. Last night there was a priest that came to our March 10 meeting and reported that 200 priests had met the day before and are supporting the march, and they're going to announce it at churches, Catholic churches all over the city, which is fantastic. And it might have something to do with the Pope's speech, but I don't know. So the other positive thing is there's been people like Jorge working in a labour committee that's for immigrant rights, and they got the main unions in Chicago to issue a statement saying that they're supporting the May 1st mobilisation on International Workers' Day. Now this never happens with unions. Unions don't support International Workers' Day, or do it very, very quietly.
It's a communist thing.
Yeah, because it's they don't want to be associated with Reds, and that's all, whatever, all the stuff that Americans have experienced in McCarthyism. There's Labour Day, that's the Labour Day. So this was a significant event, I think. Even though it's just a press conference, it actually means if you're in a union, you can say, my union is supporting this, we should take the day off at work, and it's for immigrant rights, it's also against the war, it's for health care for all. So there is, Labour, clergy, I think on the campuses there's clearly a mobilisation happening on the campus. There's been large numbers of people participating and talking about a walkout both in high schools and in college campuses. And we're at the March 10 meetings we're also hearing from mobilisations about in the suburbs, places like Aurora. People reported last night that they're getting buses. In the south side there's a group called SECURE, which stands for, it's the Southeast Chicago Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and they says that they're bringing 10 buses. Martin Unzueta, who was planning to be here today, is actually at a meeting today with the 18th and the 26th Street Chamber of Commerce, basically getting support from the business communities. They endorse the march, which means that their workers can then take the day off, and so all these things kind of bode really, really well. We're getting less media coverage this year. Some of the media or radio personalities have said, I don't see what the point of marching is this year. What are we marching for? We're not marching. Last year there was a raid in Little Village right before the march, and I think it was maybe Tania's organising an event, but it's an anniversary of it. But partly our response to that, people usually seen when raids happened, people just are crying and running and in chains. When they raided Little Village, we all got out there in the streets. We had a sit down in the middle of the street, and the whole argument was that everybody should march in May Day, and this is why we're marching. Now, if they did that again, it would have a big impact. So, but we're not wishing for a raid like that, obviously. So yeah, it's really hard to say how big it's going to be. There's different estimates, but I think we've made the point that we won the argument that we should march this year, even though it's an election year. because the elections are not going to solve the problems that the undocumented face in this country, nor are they going to solve the issues that the labour movement solve. So the process for us is that many people are going to go and vote for all the right reasons, but we think we have to build a movement at the same time from below.
Let me add my 2 cents very quickly. We already won in the process of organizing this demonstration. We had 144 as of today, 144 organizations sponsoring the march. Some of the names in this big list are coalitions of organizations, which it means, they contain 10, 20, 40, one of them 135 organizations in this coalition. We're only listing the coalition. That in itself it's a success. We are building incredible networks and an incredible movement. Second, if we get Obama, Hillary, and McCain, and for that matter Tom Tancredo, to talk about immigration, again, that's another success. Regardless of whether we have 21,000 or 52,000 people marching or 250,000. Don't matter much the number. If we get these people, if we bring the issue of immigration back to the table, let's start discussing again, let's start talking about it. Last, if we get a community that is a little bit less fearful, if we empower the community again, if they feel again that yes, there's been raids, there's deportations, but you know what? We just abandoned the factory and came to march. We have some power. We shut down half the city of Chicago. That's a success.
And if I can just quickly one thing. We all have ideas. I think definitely the "we're still here" part and pay attention to us, it's still happening, is really important, because just because there were 2 marches before doesn't mean that anything got solved or that anything got better. And I think that, in particular with the group of youth that I've been meeting with, we've been talking a lot about what's going to happen afterwards, and kind of using the May 1st demonstrations to kind of galvanize the people, the base, if you want to call it that, and then see what we can do afterwards, because we know that undocumented students and undocumented immigrants are going to continue living their lives after the marches, and so we have talked about continuing the activism, and that kind of started around organizing around May 1st. And quickly, I wanted to mention the April 24th, so tomorrow, is the 1-year anniversary of the raid that happened in Little Village, and so there will be an action there, and we can talk about it afterwards.
So at the beginning of your talk, you were kind of talking about the movements of people and how it's a natural thing. We move. I see a big problem here. People aren't able to work in their countries. They're not able to get an education in their countries. And they're being forced to leave because they have no other choice, and risk their lives on a journey that often they don't make it to the other side because they have no other choice. And this is happening all over the world. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on what should be happening internationally. I mean, NAFTA has a lot to do with this. Maybe if you have thoughts on Mexico specifically, what needs to be happening so that these movements of people aren't almost fatal in some way?
What's got to happen is some sort of equalization. Surprisingly enough, a recent study by the Mexican consular system revealed that around 70% of all undocumented Mexicans that came to the United States in the last 5 or 6 years had jobs in Mexico. It's not a movement, out of the unemployed, the more impoverished ones. They had jobs. Problem is, if you keep paying $4 a day in Mexico, who cares about the job I have in Mexico? It's 10 times higher in the United States. I will move. So it's not even a matter of creating more jobs, so there are jobs available. It's a matter of how the wealth gets built and distributed. Give you an example. Some jeans factory, Levi's. Levi's used to produce in the United States all the kids. And then they shut down shop here in the United States. They went to Mexico. At the time, you could buy any Levi's here in the United States for $30. And workers at the Levi's factories most of them were union. Most of them were unionized, at the time it was the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And they were earning $7 or $8 an hour, more or less on average. You go down to Mexico and you start paying 32 cents an hour, more or less. And you bring the jeans back in the United States. This was the famous Maquiladora program. So you take your merchandise, manufacture it in Mexico, bring the jeans back to the United States and sell them in $40. You're producing 10 times cheaper, and you're increasing the price of the jeans because now you have to manufacture it in Mexico, So you increase the price of the jeans in $10. All the added value, the aggregated value in the process doesn't stay in Mexico. It comes here to the United States. So you start having a lot more 100-foot yachts in Lake Michigan, and a lot more private jets in some industries because the added value came here to the United States. Incredibly more added value than when you were producing locally. Well, that's a mess. You have to solve that somehow. How? You have to increase wages in Mexico. You have to create and consolidate workers' rights. If your company moves down to Mexico, that doesn't mean you're going to pay 1/10 of what you're paying here in the United States. Let's make it an inconvenient thing for companies to move. If you are producing down in Mexico and you keep increasing your prices here in the United States, you can't bring all of your money from Mexico into the United States. You have to keep the money there or some part of the money there. And it's, a process of equalization of economic conditions. And that's just to say the least. I mean, let's open up the borders and, let's unionize everybody and let's get into a very nice fight to see how much you pay me in wages. And, let's allow people to really strike. Because strikes in Mexico mean shutting down the plant. Strikes in the United States mean you go out and, I'm on a strike. Yeah, but the plant keeps producing. So let's bring to the United States the right to strike, and we would see changes. It's a very incredibly complicated response, but those are some elements for the response.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, I think you're right. There is a natural movement of people under capitalism because people fill labour needs, and that's the way the system works. It's like, if a company opens up somewhere, it needs workers, and nations need workers, and that's why people go there. But it's not natural in the sense that people want to go. People are forced to leave, and usually that's because of imbalances in the way that the world economy is organised, because some places have been messed up by neoliberalism. And that's not a new thing. So I think that's the question, and it leads to a much bigger discussion. And we feel, in terms of like what March 10 has tried to represent, is to try and put the issue in that context, because we want to talk about NAFTA. Because if you begin to talk about NAFTA and the North American Free Trade Agreement and all the free trade agreements, because there's some people in the immigrant rights movement that say, look, for legalization, we have to accept some level of interior enforcement or border enforcement. To get something, we have to give up something. That's how Obama put it when he said, this is why I'm supporting construction of the border wall, which initially it said he opposed. And we're against that in the sense that we don't think that is a real solution, because, as long as there's a NAFTA and as long as there is, a United States that's imposing its kind of colonial economic goals on other countries south of the border or anywhere else in the world, people are going to be forced to move. So I think it opens up a different discussion with different answers. And I think partly you have to say, if money is allowed to travel around the world and corporations, why can't regular people? Why is there borders in the way? And who do those borders actually serve? And if you need those workers there, so in some ways there's a good slogan that says the workers' struggle has no borders. I think we've got and that again gets back to the international May Day tradition and what May Day and at its core really represents. And then if you look at Europe, I mean, not that Europe is a fantasy land for over border travel, but like all the borders in Europe now, or a growing number of them, are disappearing. Where you've got an integrated Europe that looks much more like the United States, where you're able to travel from France right through up into parts of Scandinavia. So this is like completely different from how Europe used to be organised. So it shows that like these things that we have are not eternal and can actually be challenged and gotten rid of.
Kind of going back to the question before, as far as like what's going to happen after May Day, is there any support from, and I don't want to reduce it to that, but is there any support from actually like any congressman or representative? Like,
no, they are panicking. Last year, they particularly said, don't march. Nobody goes to the street this year because we may cut a deal. And then they presented a piece of legislation by the name of Strive. I don't even remember the long name, what that meant. But it was what we call a Sensenbrenner light kind of bill. It was, let's legalize some people under certain conditions, and whoever can legalize will become a federal criminal. The conditions to get legal were something like, okay, you have to go through, I don't know how many background checks, you have to pay fines for having been in the country illegally, you have to pay $1,000, plus $3,500 application fee, plus I don't remember what else. For a family of four, we did a calculation. For a family of four, mother, father, cousin, and kid, or something else, whatever, 4 people, they would end up paying $20,000 to get a provisional permit to be in the United States for 5 years. Renewable 5 years later, if you had behaved, paid taxes correctly, then you would get an extension, another 5 years. You had to pay again fines and taxes and application fees. And at the end of the 10 years, you would become a permanent legal resident. And 5 years later, if you were lucky and you haven't retired, you would start your process for citizenship. And in case you finish it on time, you could vote in 2024. And that's part of the political trick. We have a huge amount of people that want rights, and they are going to go vote Democrat. Because Latinos vote Democrat. And which Republican is going to allow, a mass of people to get into the political system of the United States and start voting Democrat? So Republicans don't want to legalize anybody. And Democrats fell into the game because they had promised that they were going to legalize if we voted for them in November 2006, and they won the majority in Congress. So they won the majority in Congress. They had to come up with something. But Republicans wouldn't allow them to come up with something, sensible. So they came out with this draconian kind of, mixed up, I used to call it the Frankenstein legislation, because it had the Kennedy's head, and then Sensenbrenner's arm, and Luis Gutierrez's leg. It was a very Frankensteinian piece of law. It was the only possible compromise. It didn't go anywhere. Ever since, Luis Gutierrez has been in hiding. Luis Gutierrez doesn't show up publicly because he was the main proponent of that 2007 bill. And he's been in hiding. And no, this year, he already made plans to speak at some rally in Washington, D.C. And every other legislature is in hiding. They don't want to touch the issue of legislation. They are praying for a 5,000 people demonstration. So, everything can go quiet and smooth, and then, just let's keep on the process to the White House.
I think maybe one more question, and then we can break into groups and start talking amongst ourselves. And some of our panelists might come out and we can speak individually with them. Emma.
Do you have any thoughts on the meat industry and how it relates to immigrant workers? And do you see a difference between the abuses faced by those workers and just the general abuses faced by immigrant workers just working for corporations? And if so, is there any kind of movement towards certain big corporations, I guess?
Back in, let me remember, back in 2000, no. The elections were in 2000. So, no, I don't remember. Yeah, elections were in 2000. So back at the beginning of his term, George Bush decided to continue what Bill Clinton had been doing, raiding mostly meat packers and similar industries, in order to look for illegal aliens. And he met with a huge protest by the meat packing industry. So big the protest that he had to cancel his policy. One thing it was for Democrats to be raiding some plants. Another thing was for Republicans to be raiding some plants. I mean, what are you, anti-industry? What are you, nuts? I mean, you're new in the job and you already made a mistake, but stop immediately raiding these plants. We want to hire whoever we want to hire and give us the freedom to do that. And George Bush stopped all raids and deportations in the workplace, allowed particularly the meatpacking industry to hire whoever they wanted to hire. There's a wonderful story and a struggle in North Carolina, Smithfield Company. Smithfield is the largest pork processing plant in the United States, the one they have in North Carolina. They are the owners of Bottle. What's the turkey brand? Huh? Butterball. Butterball and many other brands. They process around 30,000 pork daily in this plant in North Carolina. The labor union, United Food and Commercial Workers, have been trying to organize these workers. There are like 6,000 workers in this plant alone. They have been trying to organize them forever. They have never been able to. 75% of the workforce is immigrant, and 25% African Americans mostly, and very, very few whites. And then all of a sudden, on May Day 2006, the plant shut down for the first time in history because immigrant workers decided to go march in Raleigh, North Carolina. And they all abandoned the plant, and they were ever so happy, to go march on May Day. Never the union had been able to shut down this plant, and immigrant workers did it by themselves. The consequences of this have been rolling, like a snowball. The plant has been trying to fire people because of no match Social Security numbers. Workers have fought back and shut down the plant again in protest for the firings. And Smithfield went nuts. I mean, they shut the plant whenever they want to shut down the plant. And then George Bush, to please the more radical right-wing extremists in the Republican Party, goes and raids, again, meatpacking companies. And again, the meatpacking industry raises up in arms and says, stop it. I mean, go raid somebody else. Stop raiding meatpacking plants. It's one of the very complicated situations in which Bush is getting into. So they did it with the poultry industry, but not anymore with the pork industry. And they went and raided the how do you call again this, las tarimas estas, la de IFCO, pallets. The pallets industry. If you raid the pallets industry, you stop many other industries because they depend on pallets, to ship and embark a lot of merchandise. So they are getting into this very complicated mess. It doesn't matter what they raid, they are affecting other plants, other industries, And everybody's like this on immigration these days, you know. Michael Chertoff launches this initiative. If you are a no-match, Social Security no-match, you're going to get fired. And a very weird coalition composed by labor unions, civil rights activists, and chambers of commerce is created to challenge in court this decision by Michael Chertoff. You know, labor unions and chambers of commerce working together? What is this? You know, what kind of world are we getting into? They say, forget it. Don't disrupt the thing. I mean, you're going to be gone in 8 months. Okay, what do you expect to produce in 8 months that is going to benefit anybody? Stop it. And they put an injunction on the new policy by Michael Chertoff. And Chertoff is coming back 2 weeks ago and saying, well, you know, I'm going to defeat the injunction and I'm going to put in place my new rules on no matches. This is getting a little bit nutty, really, honestly, you know.
I would just add to that. I mean, that from a kind of like immigrant work perspective, I think Jorge laid it out really well. But obviously, this is where different issues become connected, because with the deregulation of business in the United States, I mean, our food, and this is no fault of the immigrant workers that are working in these plants, but our food is, you know, there's been all sorts of food scares recently, which is not just an issue for immigrants, it's an issue for anybody that has to eat. So I think these issues are all very much low wages, terrible working conditions, food that doesn't get inspected, are all part of the same picture. And, you know, the treatment of animals as well. I mean, you know, I eat meat, but I think we can treat animals a lot better than the way that they're being the way they're being treated right now. So I think that there's a number of issues that are connected, and the different industries that.
Yes, I was just curious, like, as consumers, from your perspective, as immigrants, do you think it's beneficial for us to boycott certain things, like meat? Does that benefit the immigrant situation, or?
It's incredibly complicated. Very briefly, one story: the strawberry fields in California. This is like nine or 10 years ago. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Chicago public schools discovered that the Mexican strawberries they were importing for the lunches at the Chicago public schools are contaminated. Yeah? Immediate effect, the United States stops the importation of Mexican strawberries. Second consequence, the United Farm Workers Labor Union has been organizing for 10 years the strawberry workers in the fields of California. And the election date, after 10 years of organizing, the election date is around the corner. And they are sure they're going to win the union election. Third, since the United States is not importing any more Mexican strawberries, 10,000 Mexican strawberry pickers cross the border and come to work in the California fields. The labor union organizing drive for 10 years goes nowhere, obviously. And they lose the election big time because the Chicago public schools discovered one shipment of Mexican strawberries contaminated with E. coli. Is that complicated? I can tell you, we are willing, as just an example, to boycott Kimberly-Clark. Kimberly-Clark is the producer of Scott's tissue, Codex, Tampax, Huggies, for diapers for babies, and a whole array of paper-related product, because Sensenbrenner's family has got a huge interest in Kimberly-Clark. We are willing to do that. But some of the Kimberly plants are unionized. So if we boycott Kimberly-Clark all over the board, we are going to be affecting some of the labor unions that are allies with the immigration movement. And we're going to get hit for that. At the same time, we have to find a way to demonstrate our economic power, as Shaun was saying. So what do we boycott that doesn't affect anybody but the bad guys? I don't know. I mean, is there any industry where there's only bad guys and not good guys? We're going to affect them. Definitely.
And just to add to that, I think that there's, in terms of the meat industry, it has a very strong relationship with American identity, right? Like what's for dinner, right? And I think that in part, like these things, these connections to consumerism and to these very like connections in terms of these immigrant people are being affected by what you buy is very important. I don't know how many people know about, we mentioned the Pilgrim's Pride raid that where over 400 people were arrested that happened last week. Last week. It's the main supplier of chicken to KFC, for example. And so, how many people have bought KFC in the last week? I don't know. And in terms of how that relates to animal rights, for example, I do a radio show on immigration, and I was doing research on Pilgrim's Pride and on KFC, and I found this very, very disturbing YouTube video of how the chickens are killed at the plant. And it's, like they grab them and kind of just throw them on the wall and sometimes step on them. And so I'm really trying to think, like, I hope that these are not the immigrant workers that we're,
that we're throwing the chicken on the wall.
Right. But then, if that's policy. But I think that... So that all relates to like how conscious I think we are as consumers in terms of who we support and we don't. My dad, for example, was Martin Unzueta. He works around like workers' rights. They just did a protest in front of Dunkin' Donuts because it turns out that Dunkin' Donuts is using not only the E-Verify program to fire workers, or to not hire workers, they're also using it to fire workers that have been with them for like 10 years, 5 years, whatever, and have been using it to not pay workers for their training time. And so if you get hired, you spend all this time training, and then they're like, oh, we just realized that you're undocumented, therefore you're fired, and you can't get paid for these like 5-10 days that you worked with us. And so I think that I don't know how effective a strategy it would be to like boycott KFC, for example, because of the Pilgrim Pride thing, but I think that it can definitely be used as a point of making awareness amongst other people and talking about how these issues connect to our like everyday lives.
Okay. Is it a big question, Aurora? No, okay. I know
it's got a big answer.
We've all been, in the building probably for many hours today, and it's a beautiful day, so you all want to get outside or at least stand up. So what I'm going to suggest is that maybe we do something a little dynamic for the next half an hour. And one of the things that I think we as students, having not had a lot of organizational experience, might find difficult about the prospect of trying to turn out our student bodies, trying to educate our student bodies about these issues, is just talking to people about them. Convincing people that they have a stake in these struggles and that they should come out to May 1st, they should be paying attention to the issues, they should be trying to forge relationships with the organizations that do the organizing around immigrant rights. And so what I thought maybe we could do, if people are up for it, is we could break into little groups and practice talking to each other as if one of us is somebody who's completely unaware of what is going on, and we're going to try and convince them to come out to May 1st. And that, I have some suggestions, and we can talk about them. Some of us have thought about this idea of pledge cards. Students are notoriously uncommittal, right? Like, uncommittal to the nth degree. You say, can you come out to this party? Like, oh, maybe I'll make it. Trying to get them to come to a political event is even more difficult by tenfold, right? So pledge cards, the people who are the least committal need to make the strongest commitment if they're going to come out and actually do these things. So pledge cards are some ideas that we've been, some of us have been talking about. It's not like something that everybody's going to have to do, but maybe people could try it. The more that you get used to doing something like this, the less strange it's going to feel. The other thing is that some people at the SAIC, SDS, have been working on, Megan and Matt and Marco, have been drafting a little rap about what you might say to your peers about these issues and trying to get them to come out. So I thought that these guys who've been doing this organizing for a long time could maybe walk around, see people do the rap, give advice as to whether or not it's a very good rap, maybe it's a bad one, and they could help us develop it. But so we thought we'd pass these things out and we could develop them as a group, break into little groups. And
wait, but at least everybody needs to say yes, we're gonna be there.
Oh yeah, we should.
All of who's gonna be there?
Who's
going
gonna be
to be classes? We We all cutting classes that day.
Yeah, missing a day of work might mean $75. Missing a day of class means bunk. You sleep through your classes all the time, so you should come out on Thursday.
Do it for a real motive.
It's this is also part of your education as citizens of society, not just the United States, but citizens of the world. Marco, you had something to say.
Not rap is in a rap song.
Not rap is in a rap song. It's a cheesy music video for me. Rap is in
a spiel to convince people to come.
Marco's afraid that he's being associated with something he doesn't want to be associated with.
Though that may be effective.
Can it be a goal possibly that we can walk out of here with a rap that we can give to a spiel? I'm not going to do it. Spiel, if you will, that we could deliver to our classes if our professors gave us a few minutes or things like. Can that be?
Absolutely, I think that
walk away with.
We hold people captive sometimes in classrooms. There's a moment in between when a teacher ends the class and everybody's packing their bag. You have 30 people at attention,
right.
But really, what's going to be more effective is one-on-one. People are notoriously good at avoiding the speaker who they just don't really want to listen to. But when you're making eye contact, when you're explaining an issue to somebody, they will feel it, they will experience it, and they might become committed to the issues. So
one-on-one organizing, we used to call it the labor unions. The key place there is the cafeteria or the bathroom.
The flyers in all the bathrooms.
No, I mean, it works. Believe you me, it works. In the cafeteria, it's very simple. You just walk to them with the leaflet when they are eating. They are going to be there 15 minutes, and if you're good enough, they're going to listen to you for at least 10 of those minutes. And you can give them argument, invite them, make jokes, whatever. There's one very nice. I love it. I really loved it. This is a very nice piece of information. This is the 12 million people bill. It's not $12 million. 12 million people. And it's got the explanation of what we were talking about, the Social Security Earnings Suspense Fund. How much money immigrants have been paying in taxes, whatever. It's a little bit outdated information because this is 2005. It only mentions 465 billion dollars. But you can update it on them. But it's a very nice thing. It's a funny thing to see and a very interesting thing to read. So you can use it, and just take them.
One additional
leaflets, English, Spanish. We have leaflets in our website. We have leaflets in Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Polish, English, and Spanish. We have leaflets for the suburbs. This is the City of Aurora leaflet. This is Rockford Belvedere leaflet. Labor unions, they have their own leaflet. You can also get them.
I think you guys have
this
your
is for
own
North.
Yeah, we designed a poster too. I'd love to show you guys.
And there's one last thing to talk to people about, which is the issue. We've talked about workers' rights and legalisation for the undocumented, but there's also actions against the war being planned on May Day as well.
Right.
And the International Longshoremen Workers Union on the West Coast is going to be shutting down the docks, which is, again, very important in the sense they're taking strike action to stop the war on May Day, which I think is fantastic, and they're linking up their actions with the immigrant rights marches that are happening in San Francisco, the Bay Area, Seattle, and Portland. So I think that's another issue you can talk to people about as well.
So let me just say, Tania, Shaun, and Jorge, thank you very much for coming out. And let's practice this. Let's really turn out students.
Yeah, we brought some English flyers, some
Spanish and English. Do you have an email list of events? Like I would have gone to that conference you mentioned in March. I didn't know about it.
Yes, we do.
I'm a journalist. I spent a weekend at Smithfield. I want to go cover I have a team of journalists and photographers. I want to cover things like that strike you're mentioning when they happen. How do I find out when they happen?
Well, we have a
People want to sign these.
Pardon?
We have a listserv.
Well, how do I get on it?
If you give me your email address.
I will.
You get a card or something? Oh, yeah. What media group are you with?
I'm mainly doing it freelance for major media. I wrote a series of articles on Smithfield that got published all over the world, translated Spanish, English. So and now I've hooked up with photographers and a videographer. I want to go down there and just when everything break out or covered in the media, I want to do it. So I'm just having some trouble getting plugged into.
Because there are people in Waukegan.
Go to the Google groups and look for Chicago May Day Google group.
What's the situation with Waukegan?
Waukegan, some people are organizing to come in buses, Armando Peña, and some people are organizing to come in the
Do you have
train.
regular meetings?
I'm just...
Coalition meetings? How does that work?
We have meetings, March 10 meetings, and it's every Tuesday night at the UE.
Where are they at?
It's at the UE Hall.
The UE Hall down on Ashland?
Tuesday.
Every Tuesday?
Yeah, 6:30.
Will there be true after May Day?
I'm going to give you
Oh, you're going to take a break after a
Well,
while.
we have
right?
to see. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Over on
Cool. But you'll put me on your listserv, and then I'll find out about it.
What's your name?
My name's Mike Eli.
Mike Eli, nice to meet you.
This is half the movement here.
Everybody that has one.
Yeah, I know.
Kind of like studying at the
Half 1,400 meters.
Yeah, they smuggled me into the Smithfield plant.
Oh, really? Wow.
I went right in there. It was unbelievable.
I didn't get down
A
there.
young Guatemalan woman got stabbed in the eye the day I was there. Just on the line, just knives flashing, exhaustion. It was intense. I've never seen anything like it.
But yeah,
Is this the
Anyway,
Spanish
nice to
of
hear your map.
this?
That's a Spanish version.
It's the same thing.
Same
I
flyer.
live in an all Spanish speaking building, so I'll take one of each maybe.
Both of these are what
my number at my office.
Yeah.
I live in Pilsen, that's not much
This
use.
phone doesn't work very well sometimes.
But these are good. I can hang them in my apartment building where we have our mailboxes, you know.
Right.
I can hang them there.
Great.
And take the aliens' money.
These are
Unzueta, which you use.
Yeah, we've been trying to spam these.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? I work in the actually, maybe I'll take a few because I work in the public library. So
Which public library? The one at...
I work at. No, my Spanish is not good enough to work there. But I wish I work at the Roosevelt branch by UIC, so I can hang up. I can hang up some of these there, and maybe I'll take the Spanish too because the nannies come to the story time.
Right.
That's great.
So, but what was I going to say? Oh, it's funny. I was in the library the other day, and there was something like a small thing like this on the floor. And it's so funny how we're trained. It's like you see something that looks like money, you pick it up. You know, it's embarrassing. I felt so embarrassed.
You should actually
Because
go
then
online.
I turned it over. Wait, I turned it over, and it's
One of those?
no, it was one of these like the Christian things that tell you that you're gonna go to hell. And I was like, this is not what I wanted.
Yeah, no, but these you can take as many as you want.